9 months ago, I had a husband who coached our daughter's soccer team, a best friend who helped me pick out curtains for the kitchen, and a nursing career I'd spent 6 years building from the ground up. By the end of summer, I was sleeping in the back seat of my car in a hospital parking lot, showering at a truck stop off Interstate 40, and eating gas station sandwiches because I couldn't afford anything better. My husband had been sleeping with my best friend for 3 years. When I confronted them, they didn't just leave me. They dismantled my entire life with a precision that made me realize it had all been rehearsed long before I ever walked in on them. I lost custody of my daughter. I lost the house I'd helped pay for. I lost my job at the hospital because someone filed a complaint about my mental health that turned out to be a lie told by the one person I trusted most. And then, 6 weeks into living out of my car, I received a certified letter from a bank I'd never heard of, informing me that my grandmother had opened a safety deposit box in my name 11 years ago, 3 months before she died. Inside that box was $85,000 in cash, a USB drive, and a handwritten note that said my grandmother's death hadn't been natural, that my husband and my best friend had been placed in my life on purpose, and that everything I needed to destroy them was saved on that drive. My grandmother had been trying to warn me for years. I just hadn't been listening. Before we go any further, I want to thank you for being here and walking through this with me. If you believe that the truth matters, even when it's ugly, please consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps stories like mine reach people who need to hear them. Now let me tell you how I got here. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 38 years old, and until everything fell apart, I lived in a 3-bedroom house on Maple Ridge Drive in Clarksville, Tennessee, a military town where people waved at each other from their driveways and brought casseroles when someone got sick. I worked as a registered nurse in the cardiac unit at Gateway Memorial Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts 3 days a week and picking up overtime whenever it was available. The pay was $52,000 a year before taxes, which covered my share of the mortgage, groceries, and the occasional birthday party at the bounce house place our daughter Lily loved. My husband Derek managed investment portfolios at a regional wealth management firm called Lifeline Financial. He wore pressed shirts, carried a leather briefcase that I'd bought him for our 5th anniversary, and had the kind of smile that made people trust him with their retirement savings. He left for work at 7:30 every morning, kissed me on the forehead, and told me to have a good day in a voice that sounded like he meant it. When he came home, he'd change into sweatpants, play with Lily in the backyard until dinner, and fall asleep on the couch watching whatever game was on. It looked like a marriage. It felt like a marriage. It performed every function of a marriage except actually being one. My best friend Monica Park was an occupational therapist at the same hospital where I worked. We'd met during orientation 8 years ago, bonded over terrible cafeteria coffee and a shared hatred of hospital politics, and became inseparable almost immediately. She was the person I called when Lily said her first word. She was the one who sat with me in the ER waiting room when Derek threw out his back playing basketball. Every Saturday morning, she came over with donuts and we'd sit on my porch while Lily drew with sidewalk chalk, talking about everything and nothing the way best friends do when they've known each other long enough that silence isn't uncomfortable. She knew every detail of my life. My insecurities about whether I was a good enough mother. My worries about Derek seeming distant lately. My frustration that the charge nurse position I'd applied for 3 times kept going to someone else. Monica listened to all of it with what I thought was genuine empathy, nodding in the right places, squeezing my hand when I cried, saying things like "You're doing amazing, Elena, don't let anyone tell you otherwise." What I didn't know was that while she was sitting on my porch eating donuts and telling me my marriage was fine, she'd been sleeping with Derek since before Lily started preschool. What I didn't know was that their relationship wasn't just an affair. It was part of something calculated and ugly that connected to my grandmother's death and a fraud scheme worth more money than I could comprehend. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My grandmother, Ruth Weston, died 11 years ago. Officially, it was heart failure. She was 73, had a history of cardiac issues, and passed away in her sleep at the assisted living facility in Murfreesboro where she'd been living for 2 years. Everyone said it was peaceful. Everyone said she'd been declining for months. Everyone said it was expected. Everyone except my mother's older sister, my Aunt Phyllis, who stood at the funeral reception with a plate of food she wasn't eating, and told anyone who'd listen that something wasn't right. That Ruth had been sharp as a tack 2 weeks before she died. That she'd been asking questions about the facility's billing practices and the investment company managing the residents' finances. That she'd called Phyllis 3 days before her death and said she'd found something that people would want to keep quiet. Nobody took Phyllis seriously. She'd always been the family eccentric, the aunt who showed up to Thanksgiving with newspaper clippings about nursing home scandals, and handed out pamphlets about elder financial abuse at family barbecues. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, kept a filing cabinet in her spare bedroom, and once reported her own dentist to the state licensing board because she thought he was overbilling Medicare. The family loved her but dismissed her. "Oh, that's just Phyllis," they'd say, rolling their eyes with affection. "She sees conspiracies in everything." I was 27 when my grandmother died. I was grieving, overwhelmed, planning a wedding to Derek that was 6 months away. I didn't have the bandwidth to entertain my aunt's theories about something sinister behind a 73-year-old woman's heart failure. I hugged Phyllis at the funeral, told her I'd call, and didn't call for 3 months. By the time I did, she'd stopped bringing it up. Or at least she'd stopped bringing it up to me. What I didn't know was that Phyllis had spent the next decade quietly investigating, filing records requests, tracking financial transactions, recording conversations, building a case in her spare bedroom with the same meticulous attention to detail that made everyone call her paranoid. But none of that mattered to me until the Tuesday afternoon that ended my marriage. I'd switched shifts with another nurse and come home 4 hours early. Lily was at school until 3:30. Derek's car was in the driveway, which was unusual for a Tuesday, but I assumed he was working from home. The front door was unlocked. The house was quiet in that particular way that tells you people are home but don't want to be heard. I didn't call out. Something in my body knew before my brain did. Some instinct that had been building for months, maybe years, assembling evidence from 1,000 small moments I'd chosen to ignore. Monica canceling Saturday donuts more often lately. The way they'd stopped making eye contact with each other at our 4th of July barbecue, which seemed odd at the time but made perfect sense now. Because people who are hiding something together learn to avoid looking at each other in public. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom. The door was closed. I could hear movement behind it, the sound of conversation spoken too quietly to make out words. I opened the door without knocking, because it was my house and my bedroom and I shouldn't have to announce myself in my own home. They were in our bed. The bed where I'd nursed Lily through an ear infection at 3 in the morning. The bed where Derek and I had talked about having another baby just 2 months ago. Monica saw me first, and the expression on her face wasn't guilt or shame. It was irritation. The look you give someone who walks into a room at an inconvenient moment, like I was the one being rude. Derek sat up and ran his hand through his hair with the practiced calm of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Elena," he said, in that measured voice he used when he thought I was overreacting about something. "This isn't how we wanted you to find out. We." That word hit me like a physical blow. We implies planning. We implies that this wasn't a moment of weakness but a partnership. That they'd discussed how they would eventually tell me, like my devastation was a logistics problem they'd need to manage. Monica pulled the sheet up around herself and had the audacity to look sympathetic. "I know this is hard," she said. "And I know you're going to need time to process this. But Derek and I have been talking, and we think it's better for everyone if we're honest about what's been happening." What's been happening? Like it was weather. Like it was something that occurred naturally instead of something they chose to do hundreds of times while smiling at me across dinner tables and hospital break rooms. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. Derek looked at Monica. Monica looked at the bedspread. 3 years, he said, like he was reporting quarterly earnings. "Since that conference in Memphis. 3 years. Lily was 4 when it started." I did the math immediately because that's what nurses do. We calculate. 3 years of Thursday evening texts saying running late at work that actually meant he was with her. 3 years of Saturday mornings where Monica sat on my porch eating donuts and listening to me worry about my marriage while she was the reason my marriage was dying. 3 years of birthday parties and holidays, and bedtime stories with our daughter, while maintaining a parallel life I knew nothing about. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I walked to Lily's room, packed a bag with her favorite stuffed animal and enough clothes for a week, drove to the school, picked her up early, and went to my sister Karen's apartment on the other side of town. I told Karen something happened and I needed a few days. She didn't ask questions, just made up the pull-out couch and ordered pizza for Lily. That night, while Lily slept in the next room clutching the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was born, I sat in my sister's kitchen and cried until my chest ached and my eyes were so swollen I couldn't see properly. Not because I was surprised, because I'd known, somewhere beneath all the rationalizations and willful blindness, I'd known for months and chosen not to see it because seeing it would mean my daughter's family was a lie. The next 14 days destroyed what was left of my life with surgical precision. Derek filed for divorce before I did, which gave him procedural advantages my attorney explained I couldn't overcome without significant financial resources I didn't have. His lawyer was a woman named Christine Fowler who specialized in aggressive family litigation and seemed to take personal pleasure in methodical demolition. 3 days after I left the house, the head of nursing at Gateway Memorial called me into a meeting and informed me that a formal complaint had been filed alleging I'd been showing signs of psychological instability at work, erratic behavior, emotional outbursts, potential substance abuse concerns. The complaint recommended I be placed on administrative leave pending a review. I asked who filed it. Hospital policy prevents me from sharing that information, the nursing director said, not meeting my eyes. It was Monica. I knew it the way you know the sun will rise. She had access to the internal reporting system. She knew enough about my schedule and behavior to fabricate plausible concerns. And she had every reason to want me unemployed because a woman without income can't fight a custody battle. Without my job, I couldn't afford my own attorney. The court appointed one, a man named Douglas Pratt who smelled like coffee and resignation and carried files in a briefcase held together with duct tape. Derek's attorney buried Douglas in motions and filings, each one painting me as increasingly unstable. She used my job loss as evidence. She used the fact that I was living in my sister's apartment as evidence. She used everything that had been done to me as proof that I was the problem. The custody hearing lasted 2 hours. Derek showed up in a suit with Monica beside him, and Monica testified as a character witness. She sat in front of the judge and described conversations we'd supposedly had where I'd talked about feeling overwhelmed, about struggling to cope, about sometimes forgetting to pick Lily up from school. None of it was true. But she delivered every fabrication with the kind of tearful reluctance that suggested she was heartbroken about having to say these things about someone she cared about. The judge, a man named Harold Brennan, listened with apparent concern and awarded Derek temporary full custody. I was given supervised visitation every other Saturday. 2 hours with my daughter in a community center conference room while a social worker sat in the corner taking notes. The first Saturday I walked into that room and Lily ran to me saying, "Mommy, why can't I come home with you?" I understood that there is a specific kind of pain that exists beyond what the body is designed to handle. A pain that doesn't have a location because it's everywhere at once, in every cell, every breath, every moment between heartbeats. I held my daughter, and told her everything was going to be okay. And it was the biggest lie I'd ever told because I had no reason to believe it was true. After the custody ruling, Karen's husband started making comments about the situation being temporary and everyone needing to get back on their feet. I understood. Their apartment was small. My presence was a strain. I left before I was asked. Because watching someone work up the courage to tell you you're no longer welcome is worse than just going. I stayed with a coworker for 9 days. Then a college friend for 6. Then another nurse I'd worked with who lasted 11 days before her boyfriend said it was weird having a stranger around. Each time, the sympathy was genuine at the beginning and exhausted by the end. People want to help until helping becomes inconvenient. Until your crisis starts to feel like a personality trait instead of a temporary situation. When I ran out of couches, I started sleeping in my car. A 2017 Honda Civic parked in the hospital parking lot where I used to work. Close enough that I could use the 24-hour bathroom in the ER waiting area if I timed it right. I kept a pillow and blanket in the trunk. I showered at the truck stop off I-40 for $4. I ate what I could afford, which was usually a gas station sandwich or a dollar menu burger. This was my life now. The woman who'd had a house and a career and a family was sleeping in a parking lot, eating cold food in her car. visiting her daughter for 2 hours every other Saturday under the supervision of a stranger with a clipboard. 6 weeks into this, on a Thursday morning when I was sitting in my car trying to summon the energy to apply for another job that wouldn't call me back, a certified letter arrived at my sister's apartment. Karen texted me a photo of the envelope. It was from Mountain Valley Savings and Trust, a bank in Murfreesboro I'd never heard of. Karen opened it at my request and read me the contents over the phone. Dear Miss Carter, we are writing to inform you that a safety deposit box registered in your name was opened on the 14th of January 2015 by Ruth A. Weston, with instructions that access be transferred to you upon verification of identity. The annual fees have been prepaid through 2028. Please visit our Murfreesboro branch with valid identification to claim the contents. January 2015. 3 months before my grandmother died. She'd opened a safety deposit box in my name and prepaid the fees for 13 years, like she was planning for something she might not be alive to see through. I drove to Murfreesboro that afternoon. The bank was a small brick building on the town square. The kind of institution that's been there so long it's become part of the architecture. The branch manager, a woman with reading glasses and a patient voice, verified my identity using my driver's license and a series of security questions that only someone who knew my grandmother's personal details could answer. She led me to the vault, pulled out a narrow metal box, and left me alone in a private room. Inside the box was cash. $85,000 in $100 bills, bundled with rubber bands and smelling faintly of lavender, the way my grandmother's dresser drawers always smelled. Beneath the money was a USB drive in a small plastic case. And beneath that was a letter written on lined notebook paper in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone and things have gotten bad enough that someone finally told you about this box. I asked Phyllis to make sure the bank sent notification if you ever needed it, and she's been watching over you even when you didn't know it. Phyllis has been tracking your situation. When things got bad enough, she contacted the bank and triggered the notification process. That's how this letter found you. I need you to know something that no one else will tell you. I didn't die of heart failure. I was murdered by people who didn't want me asking questions about where the residents' money was going at Harmony Glen. Your husband Derek works for the people who run the investment fund that was stealing from us. He was put in your life on purpose, to monitor what I knew and whether I'd passed any of it along to family. The USB drive has everything. Financial records, recorded conversations, documents showing how Ridgeline Financial partnered with Harmony Glen to liquidate residents' assets through fraudulent investment schemes. Your friend Monica was brought in later to make sure you stayed manageable after I died. Phyllis has copies of everything and knows what to do. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I tried, but you were young and happy and planning a wedding, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that. Phyllis tried too, and you both thought she was being paranoid. She wasn't. She was being brave. The money is for fighting. Use it to get your daughter back and make these people answer for what they've done. Or use it to run somewhere safe and start over. Either way, use it. Don't let them win. I love you more than I ever managed to say out loud. Grandma Ruth. I read that letter 4 times. Then I sat in the bank's private room and pressed my forehead against the cool metal table and cried in a way I hadn't cried since the custody hearing. Not from sadness this time, but from the crushing weight of understanding that the woman my family had dismissed as a paranoid eccentric had been right about everything. That she'd spent her final years building a safety net I didn't know I needed. That she and Phyllis had been protecting me from the shadows while I ignored every warning they tried to give. I called Phyllis from the bank parking lot. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for this call for 11 years. You found the box, she said. It wasn't a question. Aunt Phyllis, I started, but my voice broke. Come to my house, she said. I have the rest. Phyllis lived 40 minutes away in a ranch house with a vegetable garden and a spare bedroom that had been converted into an archive. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Boxes were stacked and labeled by year. A corkboard covered one entire wall, connected by colored string in a pattern that looked chaotic until she started explaining it, and then it looked like the most organized investigation I'd ever seen. She'd spent 11 years documenting how Ridgeline Financial, through a subsidiary called Cornerstone Asset Management, had systematically defrauded elderly residents at Harmony Glen and 6 other assisted living facilities across Tennessee. The scheme was simple and devastating. Financial advisors like Derek would gain power of attorney over residents' assets, supposedly to manage their investments. Instead, they'd liquidate holdings, transfer funds through shell companies, and replace real account statements with fabricated ones showing steady growth. By the time the residents died, their estates were hollow. Families who expected inheritances found nothing and assumed their loved ones had simply spent it down on care costs. My grandmother had noticed discrepancies in her own statements and started asking questions. She'd been a bookkeeper for 30 years before retiring. Numbers were her language, and she could spot a fraudulent balance sheet the way a musician spots an out-of-tune instrument. When her questions became too persistent, she'd been moved to a different wing of the facility. Her medications had been adjusted by a doctor affiliated with the scheme, and within 3 months she was dead. Heart failure, they said. Convenient, quiet, unremarkable. Phyllis had everything. Bank records showing transfers from resident accounts to Cornerstone shell companies. Recorded phone conversations between Ridgeline executives, discussing how to handle families who asked too many questions. Employment records showing that Derek had been specifically assigned to court me after my grandmother started investigating, positioning himself in my life to monitor whether Ruth had passed along anything dangerous before she died. Documents showing she'd been recruited 2 years into my marriage when the monitoring needed to expand. Her salary at the hospital was supplemented by monthly payments from a consulting company that traced back to Ridgeline. Every Saturday morning donut run had been a check-in. Every heart-to-heart conversation had been data collection. On the USB drive was a video file. Phyllis had helped Ruth record it in the months before her death, smuggling a camera into the facility during visits. My grandmother appeared on screen sitting in her room at Harmony Glen, wearing the blue cardigan she'd worn to every family dinner for 20 years. She looked thin but alert, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Elena honey," she said. And hearing her voice after 11 years made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the laptop. "I'm making this because I need you to know the truth, and I don't think I have much time left. They've changed my medications again and I can feel myself getting weaker. If something happens to me, don't believe what they tell you about natural causes." She explained everything calmly and methodically, the way she used to explain her bookkeeping work when I was a kid sitting at her kitchen table doing homework. She named names, cited account numbers from memory, described conversations she'd overheard between staff members who didn't know she was listening. "Your Aunt Phyllis knows everything I know," she said at the end. I gave her copies of all my records. "She'll keep building the case after I'm gone. And if you ever need help, she'll know when to reach you and how." She paused and adjusted her glasses. "I know everyone thinks Phyllis is a little intense. But she's the smartest person in this family, and she loves you as much as I do. Trust her. Trust the evidence. And don't let these people keep stealing from families like ours." The video ended with her reaching toward the camera, and the screen went dark. I used the $85,000 to hire a real attorney. Not the duct tape briefcase kind but a former federal prosecutor named Valerie Chen who'd left the Justice Department to start a private practice specializing in financial fraud cases. When I showed her the USB drive and Phyllis's archive, she went quiet for a long time, scrolling through documents and recordings with an expression that shifted from skepticism to focus to something close to excitement. "This is substantial," she said finally. "This isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is a federal fraud investigation waiting to happen. Do you want to fight, or do you want to settle?" "I want my daughter back," I said. "And I want them to answer for what they did to my grandmother." Valerie connected me with Agent Sandra Reeves at the FBI's Nashville field office. Sandra arrived at Valerie's conference room the next day, reviewed the evidence for 3 hours, and made 2 phone calls that set everything in motion. Within a week, federal investigators had subpoenaed Ridgeline Financial's records. The investigation moved slowly, because federal investigations always do when they're building cases against people with money and lawyers. Former Ridgeline employees started coming forward once they learned the FBI was involved. Families of deceased residents who'd always suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it began providing their own documentation. The case expanded from 1 assisted living facility to 7, from 1 state to 3. While the federal case built momentum, Valerie dismantled my custody arrangement. She subpoenaed Monica's financial records, revealing the monthly payments from Ridgeline's consulting subsidiary. She obtained the internal complaint Monica had filed against me at the hospital, showed it was fabricated, and presented evidence that Monica had been financially motivated to destroy my credibility. She filed a motion to recuse Judge Brennan, presenting evidence that he'd received campaign contributions from a PAC funded by Ridgeline executives. A new judge reviewed the custody case, spent 45 minutes examining the evidence, and reversed the original ruling entirely. Full custody returned to me. Derek's visitation was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The afternoon I picked Lily up from Derek's house for the last time, she was standing on the porch with her backpack and her stuffed elephant, and when she saw my car she ran across the lawn screaming "Mommy" at a volume that probably alarmed the neighbors. I held her so tight she squirmed and said, "You're squishing me," and I said, "I know, baby," and didn't let go. The arrests began on a Monday morning in September. Federal agents raided Ridgeline Financial's offices in Nashville, carrying boxes out of a building that had the word integrity etched into the stone above the front entrance. The irony was not lost on local news reporters who mentioned it in every broadcast. Derek was arrested at the house. Our house. The house I'd helped pay for, where I'd painted Lily's bedroom pale yellow and planted tomatoes in the backyard. He came out in handcuffs wearing the sweatpants he always changed into after work, and the footage showed him looking bewildered, like he genuinely couldn't process that consequences had arrived for him. He'd spent so long believing he was protected that being arrested felt like a system malfunction rather than justice. Monica was arrested at the hospital during her shift. 2 agents walked into the occupational therapy department and asked her to come with them. According to a coworker who watched it happen, she started crying immediately, performing distress with the same practice skills she'd used to testify against me in court. The managing partners at Ridgeline, the ones who'd designed the scheme and profited most from it, were arrested the same day. News cameras caught them being escorted from their homes in subdivisions with names like Heritage Estates and Whispering Pines, past neighbors who stood on their lawns watching with the stunned expressions of people who trusted their financial advisors with their retirements. Investigations into Harmony Glen led to the facility's medical director, a man who'd been adjusting medications for residents who asked too many questions. Criminal charges followed. Judge Brennan resigned before he could be removed. He issued a statement about health concerns and wanting to spend time with family. 3 months later, he was indicted for accepting improper gifts and manipulating judicial proceedings. Every case he'd handled was flagged for review. My custody case was among the first overturned. The trial stretched across a year. Derek's case came first for me personally, though the Ridgeline executives had larger cases that drew more media attention. I sat in the courtroom every day, in the back row, watching prosecutors lay out how my marriage had been a monitoring operation funded by people who'd stolen from elderly residents and killed my grandmother when she threatened to expose them. Derek's attorney argued he was a low-level employee following orders. The financial records showed otherwise. He'd received bonuses tied directly to the number of residents whose assets he'd successfully liquidated. He'd been promoted twice based on performance metrics that measured how efficiently he could drain people's life savings. He wasn't a pawn. He was a willing and enthusiastic participant. The jury convicted him on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. The judge sentenced him to 12 years. When the verdict was read, Derek looked at me from across the courtroom. I expected anger or defiance. What I saw was something smaller than that. Bewilderment. The expression of a man who'd built his entire career on the assumption that vulnerable people couldn't fight back, and was only now confronting how catastrophically wrong that assumption had been. Monica took a plea deal. 6 years in exchange for testimony against Ridgeline's executives. She wrote me a letter from prison, 3 pages of apology that read like she'd workshopped it with a therapist. She said her friendship with me had started as an assignment but grown into something real. That she genuinely cared about me even while reporting on my life to people who were paying her. That she hoped someday I could understand that people are complicated and good intentions can exist alongside terrible choices. I read it once. I didn't respond. You don't owe forgiveness to someone who sat on your porch every Saturday morning gathering intelligence about your life, while pretending to be your closest friend. Complexity doesn't excuse betrayal. Good intentions don't undo 3 years of calculated deception. Monica wanted absolution, and I wasn't the one who could give it to her. The Ridgeline executives were convicted on federal charges carrying sentences between 15 and 25 years. The civil settlement required the fund to pay restitution of $1.4 billion to victims' families. Harmony Glen and 6 other facilities were placed under independent oversight. New regulations were enacted requiring third-party audits of financial management services operating in assisted living facilities. My grandmother's estate received $900,000 in restitution. I donated every cent to elder advocacy organizations because that money was built on suffering and I didn't want it in my life. I had enough from what Grandma Ruth had left in the safety deposit box, supplemented by the salary from a new job I'd gotten at Vanderbilt Medical Center after my name was cleared and the fabricated complaint was officially expunged. I used some of the remaining money from the safety deposit box to start a small nonprofit called the Ruth Weston Fund, dedicated to investigating financial abuse in elder care facilities and providing legal resources to families who suspect their loved ones are being exploited. Phyllis serves on the board. She brings pamphlets to every meeting, and nobody rolls their eyes anymore. Lily is 9 now. She sleeps in her own room in an apartment I pay for, with money I earn. The walls are painted pale yellow because that's her favorite color and she wanted it to match her old room. Someday she'll ask harder questions, and I'll answer them honestly because lies, even well-intentioned ones, are the foundation of every terrible thing that happened to our family. I still keep the certified letter from Mountain Valley Savings and Trust in my wallet. The paper has gotten soft from being folded and unfolded. The crease is wearing thin from all the times I've pulled it out and stared at it during moments when I needed to remember that rock bottom isn't permanent. That the people everyone dismisses as paranoid are sometimes the only ones paying attention. That a grandmother who kept meticulous records and an aunt who never stopped investigating saved my life from a distance because love doesn't require proximity to be powerful. Phyllis came over for dinner last week. She brought donuts. Saturday mornings belong to us now. Her and me and Lily, sitting on my apartment balcony, while Lily draws with chalk on the concrete and Phyllis tells stories about Grandma Ruth that I've heard 100 times but never get tired of hearing. I'm not the woman I was when I opened that safety deposit box. That woman was broken in ways she didn't think could be repaired. She believed that doing everything right was supposed to protect you, that loyalty meant something. That the people sitting closest to you at the dinner table couldn't possibly be the ones holding the knife. She was wrong about all of it. But she survived being wrong, and that's the part that matters. If this story kept you watching until the very end, do me a favor and hit that like button. It takes less than a second and it helps this story reach someone else who might need to hear that starting over isn't the same as giving up. My favorite part of all of this was the moment I picked Lily up from that porch and she ran across the lawn screaming my name. What was the moment that hit you hardest? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you there.